Jeremiah would come up to Judah and he would say, Judah, you're not right with God. You need to get right. There needs to be some changes. God's going to judge you. God's going to come, and I'm telling you what the Lord told me to say. And they turned around. They look at the temple of the Lord, and Pastor said this before. They see the temple of God, and they say, what are you talking about? God's against us. Look, we got the temple of God behind us. We got God over there. He's right in that temple. We got God in our box right across the street. You don't know what you're talking about, Jeremiah. Israel, who came from nothing, who they used to be, Judah, who had nothing, and now they think because of all the things that they have done. Okay. But what happened? What happened to that Christian who had that zeal and he lost it? What happened to that person who once loved God so much and yet now it's just something that's traditional and it's just this ordinary thing. It's not a big deal anymore. What changed? What changed in this passage? In Isaiah chapter 40, we read a lot. God is teaching the nation of Israel something that I want us to deal with today. And it's very simple. It's this: what happens to a person that forgets God? What happens to somebody when they forget about the God that did so much for them? We're going to deal with that today. We're going to deal with specifically what happens when we forget God, the fact that we forget who He is. And then the fact that we forget what He can do. What He can do in our lives, what He can do for you, what He can do for me. He started the chapter and he everything to sum up what he was saying is the point was this, flesh is nothing. And he said the grass withers, it's this and it's that, and it's going to pass away, it's going to get small, but on the other hand, the Lord of the Lord endures forever. He says, I'm God, you're man, you're small, I'm great. I am something big, you are not who I am. You're not something big. You are you and I am me. It's basically the entire passage. That's what I get out of it when I read it. When you read God, He says, He asks them all these questions. He says, who's measured the earth? And who did this? And who did that? Who hath directed the Spirit of the Lord, He says in verse 13. Or been His counselor and have taught Him. Who did that? Who taught me, God says, this? And who showed me how to do this? It's a rhetorical question. The answer is simple. I did. I did this myself. Nobody showed God how to create something. God, in His own wisdom, did it. And He then shows the nations. He says the nations, they're like a drop in the bucket. They're nothing. They're this big. And Israel had this impression that, they are this great thing for God. And they had this impression that I'm really something now that God is using in the world because I am might and I am powerful and I am strong. And God wants them to understand you're not. You're not. What happens when we forget God? We forget who God is. Look down at chapter 40. We're going to deal mainly with verse 28 and following after that. Everything above it was just trying to understand, what's going on. There's a lot more to say about the chapter, but I want us to focus a lot in verse 28. We're going to look at 29. We're going to look at the rest of the chapter. We'll go back and forth. We'll look at some other verses. But he asks him a question here. He says, have you not known? Hast thou not known? Hast thou not known? Hast thou not heard that the everlasting God, the Lord, the Creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary. I like how he orders it here in the verse. He asks them this. He says, did you not know? Did you not know? And the answer is yes, you knew, but you forgot. And have you not heard? Yes, you heard, but you forgot. What? What is it? That the everlasting God, first of all, that God is everlasting. And that the Lord, the fact that God is the Lord, and the fact that the Creator of the ends of the earth, the fact that God is our Maker. Did you not know these things, Israel? They're simple. They're simple things. And did you not know this? And that this God, who's now speaking to you, fainteth not? It isn't weary. I don't think this is a chapter of rebuke. And I did at first. I thought this was a chapter, this passage was dealing, with a problem. They had this issue, and they did. They had this issue they were dealing with. They had forgotten so many things about God, and we're going to look at that. But I don't want you to look at this passage as it's looking at it in the sense that God is rebuking Israel here. Although in some way, I believe it's true that he is. I think it's more of an encouragement, because if you look at the end of the chapter, there's a lot of application to Israel, and there's a lot of positive things he says. But before he does that, he first deals with the fact that they had forgotten him. He first deals with the fact that they had forgotten these things about him, and because that, they forgot what he could do. I mean, if you don't know that God is everlasting and that God is the Lord and that he's the creator, I mean, you don't know much about your God, do you? If you forgot that God is powerful, if you forgot all the things that he did for you in the past, you're not going to know what he can do for you in the future. And so the first thing I want us to look at is the fact that God is everlasting. God is everlasting. In Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 27, it says this: the eternal God is thy refuge, and underneath his are the everlasting arms. I looked up some phrases in the epistles in the New Testament that talk about God being eternal. 1 Timothy 1:17, Paul is writing Timothy, and he calls him the King Eternal. In Hebrews chapter 9, in verse 14, it refers to the everlasting, or excuse me, the eternal Spirit of God. In Isaiah 57:12, it talks. It says this just a couple chapters ahead. God is referring to himself, and I love this one. I like this one. He's the high and lofty one that inhabiteth eternity. In Genesis 21:33, Abraham refers to God as the everlasting God. And all these people, all these passages, all these parts of the Bible are trying to teach something very simple, and it's the fact that God is eternal. You know, a lot of people, they have a problem with this. And this is where a lot of people go wrong. Intellectuals, they try to understand, what does it mean to be eternal? You ever try to sit there and think about, what's it mean to be everlasting? You get a headache real quick. Have you ever, something that doesn't have a beginning, it doesn't have an end, and it's never got to stop to so how are you going to think about something like that? And the fact is, you can't. You can't think of something that's eternal because there's no limit to thinking. And everything that is in us has a beginning and has an end. We start learning something and we finish it. We start living when we die. We begin something and it ends. Everything that our whole mind is working on has a start and an end. When you try to look at God in that way, or he's everlasting, and then you try to logically think through how something can be eternal, you start to go wrong and you start to think you can understand that. And what God is trying to say is the fact that I'm everlasting is something that you don't understand. And the fact that I'm everlasting is something that is above you. It's something that's beyond you. So don't try to understand it. Just know that I am everlasting. But it does bring comfort, though, if you think about it. When you think about God being eternal, you think about all the problems that are in your life. I don't know what's going on in your life, if there's anything you're dealing with. I know that I've got some things in my life that I'm dealing with. But when you understand that God is eternal, you understand that he's been there since eternity past. David said in Psalms, he said, "Thou art from everlasting." When you know that God is from eternity past, you get a little comfortable that he knows what you're dealing with, don't you? When you begin to think that God has been through this before, that little problem that you're dealing with right now, that little thing that I had a problem with last week is something that God dealt with last century with this other guy named Bob, And there's this guy that 1,000 years ago was going through the same thing that I'm going through right now. And in the future, God's going to deal with it again. Solomon said in Ecclesiastes, he said, there's nothing new under the sun. Everything, it's done. It was done before. It's going to be done again. I'm vanity. And I wouldn't say just like he said it is vanity because of his perspective on the whole issue. And I think he got his heart right at the end. But the point is that he had a point, didn't he? Everything starts and finishes, and it's happened before, it's going to happen again. But God, the word of the Lord endures forever. That which God makes, Solomon said, it's going to last. And that which God ordains is going to come to pass. And you can trust God. You can trust that he understands your issues in life. You can trust that he understands your trials and your struggles. Why? Because he's been there before. He's already dealt with this. And nothing you need in life somebody else didn't already need once. And your problems that need an answer now, are the same problems that somebody probably went through long ago. And God wants Israel to remember that the fact that he's everlasting, but he also wants, it says in the verse that he's the Lord. And I like that too. And he says the everlasting God, and then he says the Lord. The Lord. Look, turn to Exodus chapter 6. Hold your place. We're going to come right back to Isaiah. Exodus chapter number 6. verse 2. Verse 2. And God spake unto Moses and said unto him, I am.